focusing on how she had to go through this and like what it was like for her afterwards. So there was just kind of like a lack of focus there, it felt. So she's like, no, you know, like this is my story, like this is my narrative. And reclaiming, you know, that story, like giving her name to this whole thing, I think is a, you know, that powerful act of reclamation, like sort of gives you a picture of a person. Like this happened to a person. This didn't happen to a unknown individual, unidentified college age woman, you know?
Absolutely.
So with that, I want to get into kind of some of the more details of the narrative. And just, I don't know, the ways that since she's able to tell this from a firsthand perspective, how it was different than I think the normal news we might hear of scenarios like this. So the immediate aftermath of the assault, you know, I think one of the things she first talks about as remembering waking up at the hospital with the nurses and detectives or whatever. And I think that the nurses in her like exam room and stuff, I thought it was really moving that what she recalls of them was that she said that like her fear and discomfort of the whole scenario was like a secondary feeling, I guess she had. And like the first feeling she had was like warmth. And it was because of the like nurses in that exam room. Like that's what they can give her. And I think that's, I don't know, I think that's really awesome. And like, they're not folks we talk about, I think, a lot in these scenarios because their, I guess, role in it seems rather small, but I think it's like huge, especially for victims that are finding themselves in this terrifying situation. The way that they're like trained and like that they can just bring them back into a place where it's not like a total anxiety attack, freak out moment, and like let them feel that comfort and warmth of being cared for in that moment. I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely. Especially after a horrible experience. And as we've seen, like if you've seen the show Unbelievable or read Missoula or any other kind of experience where a lot of times the cops that they're about to speak to immediately after this are also not always helpful or kind or believe them. So yeah, I think that is a super important like point of refuge.
Yeah, and it's hard. Like, so you mentioned Unbelievable, and I think one of the things about that they sort of like stress in the initial reporting is like how you have to tell this story over and over and over and over again. You know, you're telling it to the first police officer on scene, you're telling it to detectives, you're telling it to the nurses, you're telling it to the detectives again, you know, and there's just like you said, there's like no refuge there. So I like that she takes a moment to, you know, like talk about those nurses that were with her and those first moments at the hospital.
Yeah, and I think and Unbelievable is a show on Netflix, and it is about someone who's experienced a sexual assault, and it was based on a true story. It eventually, they don't believe her so much that they charge her with false reporting. And lo and behold, later on, guess what? She was telling the truth. Imagine. It's a really great show on Netflix. I think I've maybe mentioned it on here before. It is very, very, very difficult to watch. So just, I would say I recommend it, but in the way that I recommend something if you are in the total right time and place to watch it, because it was very hard to watch.
I think it took me like months to get around, like, and I still haven't finished it. I'm like, I've watched an episode and then, you know, like weeks will go by and then I'll watch another one.
I ended up binging it, even though I don't think that was healthy, just because I was so mad that I was like, get to the part where it gets better.
Yeah.
But anyway, I that did a great job of kind of showing that initial, like what it's like to get a rape kit and kind of be interviewed over and over and over again. something that I truly, and just like out of ignorance, I guess, haven't thought about before, if this actually goes to trial, and I know this, about the criminal justice system, that this took years
Yeah. So
out of her life.
I actually wrote it down. So she was 22 when it happened. And she was 26 before the case was officially over.
Insane. And she talks about having to like make excuses to get out of work so that she can go to court, having like, on a Tuesday night. No, yeah, she finally, I think, told her boss at one point. But yeah, when you start a job, like, do you want to be this person? Do you want to be a troublemaker? Do you want to admit this? Do you want to even, or do you just like, is that something you want your boss to know about you? Like all of that.
Yeah, it's. Oh.
And I just think of too, just like being super tired from a day at work, and you have to go do this over and over and over again, this emotionally traumatizing thing.
Right. So, I guess just retelling your story over and over and whatever, the police interviews, one of the most striking things I thought about the police interviews in this Know My Name is that they were talking to her in these like vagaries almost, like, we think you might have been assaulted, and she's like, okay, like, because she didn't have like her memory from that night after a certain point. So they're like, we think you might have been assaulted, and she's like, what do you mean? Like she wakes up and realizes like her underwear's gone, and like later on she recognizes bruises on herself and stuff, but she lost her memory, so she's like relying on these police officers to sort of fill her in. They tell her, these men found a man on top of you and like chased him down, and you were found like by a dumpster, and like that's kind of like it. It's almost like, we think you might have been assaulted. And she says she doesn't find out what like actually happened to her until she read an article about it. Like the exact charges, like she didn't find out all of the details until then. Like the deputies, kept saying, you might have been sexually assaulted. And then she has to like go home and then read in a newspaper that this guy was arrested for, sexually assaulting her, but they like list in the details of the article like exactly what happened to her. And I mean, like she's Googling like the words, she's like, what's digital penetration? And she had to like look it up, and like, can you imagine like reading an article where it says this happened to you, and then you don't even like know the language that they're using, so you're looking it up and you're realizing it like at your desk in your house. Like,
no,
I mean, I feel
awful.
like
I can't imagine that actually
is its like own fucking trauma that is just like, I couldn't believe that. Like whenever I read that, it seemed absolutely unbelievable that they didn't even tell her those details, and she had to find out from a fucking news article. Getting into the trial, that again took years. I don't know if I guess Brock Turner is like, his family had money, but like I just kind of was shocked at the different steps they took along the way. Like they hired private investigators. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, what do you have to like, I don't know. Like,
oh yeah, and along with his like very fancy defense attorney. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always just like am so frustrated. Like, imagine if you had put that much effort into having your son experience a consequence.
Yeah, no kidding.
Or learning right from wrong, or how to respect women. Like, imagine if that's where your resources went. It's just,
well, and the way that this like the turns this trial takes, it's just like devastating almost. So they like originally Brock Turner had like one story, and then they find out that like she can't remember, like she blacked out. So then it changes, and he's like, oh, actually, I remember these things that happened. Because like she doesn't have a story to share, so they could like make it up. Like,
well, and he'd been coached at that point.
right. And they make up that it was consensual, and like she's just outraged at it. One of the things that her like DA that's on her side, are doing these like early interviews with her, and like the questions that they ask. So one of the questions that they asked was about her relationship with her boyfriend, like, and this is a guy that she just started dating. So, like asking about the nature of the relationship, she's like, I don't know, is he my boyfriend? Is that the stage we're at? Like I was busy having the relationship instead of like trying to analyze it. But, this is apparently information that they need and that the defense is going to ask. So they were like asking her about like her relationship with her boyfriend. And like she's almost like pondering to herself, like is this like I have to say that I have a boyfriend, and then that would give legitimacy to the fact that like I don't want another man inside of me,
Right.
And I'm just like, and that was a thing that I'm obviously not, I wasn't like as familiar with this case until I read this story, and I was just like, it's almost like the excuses women have to like, I don't know, like street harassers, catcallers, you're like, I have a boyfriend. Like you have to give like an I have a boyfriend, because you can't just be free from like, I don't want you to touch me, or like, I don't want you inside me, stranger. Like that's not a good enough reason that like you have to be in a relationship or something like that.
Or have someone else's possessiveness over you. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I feel like while she's going through this interview, like it's highlighting all of these things that like I don't even think about on a day-to-day basis, but I don't know. So entire.
Well, and never mind the two men who tackled him and found him on top of her while she was passed out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in what world do you try to paint that as consent when two men felt the need to jump off their bikes and fucking tackle you?
Right. And
because they saw what you were doing and instantly knew that it was wrong.
Well, and like part of his how we were talking about, he gets to like reinvent sort of like remake up his side of the story. Like the moment they're like, well, why did you get off of her and like decided to leave? Like, why did you run? He's like, I don't think I ran, is like his memory of it. He's like, I don't think I ran. I think I was just like, oh, it's getting late, I should go. And she's just like, what sense does this make? Because first of all, there's the two Swedes that are like running after him and tackling him. And then also like, who thinks in the middle of that you're like, it's getting late, let me stand up with a full erection and run, like this is not how this goes. And it's just, it all seems so incredibly obvious and frustrating that they'd even like have the gall to like make some of these arguments. Like it's just like flagrant lies.
And it happens all the time. And the only reason this case even, and she talks about this later too, the only reason he was even convicted is because they were fucking witnesses.
Yeah.
It just is. Like that's the thing that's so, so frustrating is like how rare it is to have a witness in the case like this. And then what happens later is just a slap in the face to survivors.
Right. Well, so let's talk about that. So the verdicts come back guilty on all three charges. I think that they originally started off with more charges, but like brought it down to three charges. There's like one assault, attempt to rape charge, and then two sexual assault charges. And the prosecutor originally recommended 6 years. Right. So that was the recommendation for this man who, first time offender or whatever, was 6 years, was
with so much promise.
Right.
And potential.
And at the point where she's, reading her statement, victim impact statement, in court. She's saying like, and remember, originally recommended 6 years, the prosecutor. At the point between, the guilty